I'm going to be talking to Charlie Angus, who's the former MP for Timmins, James Bay from 2004 to 2025. He's the author of the Resistance Substack and host of the new Meidas Canada podcast. Charlie, welcome to Energy Media.
Thanks so much for having me back.
Well, you have been a busy fella, and we've got lots to talk about. So let's start with your new podcast. Tell us about it.
Well, we launched Meidas Canada just over a week ago, and the response has been insane. I'd been getting a lot of coverage in the US through Midas Touch. And what really struck me, I'd never, in 21 years in Parliament, I'm sorry, nobody pays attention to Canadian politicians. You have to do something really outrageous, and Canadian politicians don't do very outrageous things, so nobody pays attention to us. Um, After the Trump election, I decided that the final months that I had in Parliament was that I was going to start to put on the record what was coming, the fascist threat, the fascist playbook, that we were in very, very dark times. I wasn't thinking that anybody was going to be paying attention or moved by me. I wanted it on the record. And then suddenly Midas Touch started sharing what I was doing, and people were calling me from all over, and people were reaching out. So it just seemed that, well, here's the next stage. Like, let's continue this. This is not for me. The Midas Canada network that we're doing is not just, I don't want to be responding to the daily news in Parliament. There's a lot of people who can do that. I want to talk about the bigger patterns that we're seeing around the world and how we build grassroots resistance, whether it's here, whether it's in Arizona, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in Brazil.
Very interesting thing about Trump. And you remember back when he was elected in 2016, he comes into office in 2017. And there were a couple of years, maybe, where American journalists just didn't know how to talk about him. I mean, the guy lies all the time. So what do you do about an American president that lies like a sidewalk? I mean, journalists don't like to call people liars because
Yeah.
I don't know what's in your head. You might have misspoken. You might have been mistaken. I mean, that's all allowable, right? But I've since learned that volume is a big determinator. So like Danielle Smith, Premier of Alberta,
Yeah.
I have no problem as a journalist calling her a liar because the volume of mistruths that have come out of that woman are incredible. And same with Trump. And so that was one thing. But coming into Trump 2.0, it's like the Project 2025 playbook is playing out in front of our eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Your
this is the
comments,
thing,
sir.
and I think, well, I think the issue is that the mainstream media, and they get, we always use that as a real pejorative now, but they failed in the moment, and they failed in the United States because they just can't use the word fascism. And in Canada, it's he said, she said. So there's these big, massive journalistic ride around so that they don't say what's obviously in front of our face. I'll tell you a funny story. I went to Oasis the other night, and I was on this packed subway at midnight, and two Ottawa Hill journalists were on the subway with me, and they were obsessed about me. They were peppering me with questions about what I was doing, what I was saying. I was saying, "Why are you asking me? You never have me on your shows. I haven't been on one of your shows in 6 months." And then one of them said, "Well, what if you're wrong?" And I said, "Wouldn't that be the best news ever?" But the fact that you're bugging me at midnight on a packed subway car about fascism tells me you don't think that I'm wrong. So why aren't you talking about it? So this is I think, the difficulty that we have. Democracy is temperate, as Louis Fisher says, but extremism is extreme. So we are failing in our ability to stand up, whether it's, being able to talk about Charlie Kirk and what he did, and it was a tragic death, but without sort of tiptoeing around and worrying we're offending those who scream in our face if we point out the obvious playbook that's in play here. Danielle Smith, as you said, is the queen of this. She's not just acting like she's sticking her finger in the socket every single day just to get attention. It's to divert our attention from what is happening. And that's where we got to stay focused on. And that's, I think, what I'm obsessed about doing now is trying to show how these are part of larger strategies. If they work in one country, they're going to be used in our country.
Well, let's talk about Danielle Smith for a while because I've been covering her since she became premier in 2022, and her energy policies are atrocious. They're essentially, the CEO of whatever calls her up, and they, maybe the CEO of CAP, and they tell her what she should think, and that gets translated directly into policy. And so here we are now. Prime Minister Mark Carney is talking about projects of national interest. We're going to build big, build fast, yada, yada. And there's an all-out assault coming from Alberta on all of the regulations around the
Yeah.
Environmental Impact Assessment Act, the industrial emitter carbon tax, which they were part of 10 years ago. Now they want it removed and they want to grow. And the extent to which Danielle Smith is nothing more than a talking puppet for the oil industry. What did Mussolini say? Fascism is? It's the marrying of the state and the corporation, right?
Well, I mean, what's happened in Alberta is the perfect example because, again, watching how she trashed the clean energy strategy, Alberta was set to take off. Alberta was going to lead North America, at least, in a clean energy economy. It didn't mean we were shutting down the oil fields. It meant they were diversifying. I mean, what government doesn't believe in diversification? Well, right-wing governments don't believe in diversification. So it's ideology. And it's backed up also by a constant misinformation, constant bots and memes. I mean, they've made the EV car seem as though it's a threat to the Canadian family. This is not based on anything other than the massive dark money that goes into constant disinformation. And we know that the oil industry since the 80s, they're facing massive class action lawsuits for their patterns of lying and misrepresentation. So Daniel Smith actually has presented us with an option: give more breaks to companies that never cleaned up their mess, give companies more money when we just gave them massive amounts of money, or we will break up the country. That's what she keeps threatening. And now she's playing to this, MAGA astroturf gang of separatists that pose a real threat to our sovereignty and our nation. And it's all in the guise that we have to be nicer to to the boardrooms. It's very, very dangerous. She's pouring gasoline over dangerous fires.
Let's talk about what's going on down in the States, because you have talked about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I'm going to say what I said on Twitter, on X, sorry. Uh, the assassination of Charlie Kirk is abhorrent. Charlie Kirk was abhorrent. Those two things can both be true. I mean, there's no
Yeah.
point mincing words about that. But then I interviewed yesterday Matthew Bodie, who's a professor at the University of North Georgia and probably America's, acknowledged expert on Kirk and his Turning Point USA. What an eye-opener that
Mm.
is to understand the amount of organizing and radicalizing that goes on amongst conservative youth in the US. Is if that ever comes to Canada at scale, we're in trouble.
Well, it is. I mean, this movement of radicalizing young men has been happening for some time. I encourage people to read the book. It came from something awful. It is the book on how 4chan, basically people, teenagers playing with, Japanese anime cartoons, ended up creating the American Nazi movement, the radicalization of the far right that happened from 2012 to 2016, 2017, very much tied in with Trump, very much tied in with players like Nick Fuentes and what Charlie Kirk is doing. And Steve Bannon is the dark lord of this. Steve Bannon and uh, yeah, Annapolis had decided, let's go to the universities and colleges and cause trouble. Let's start fights over saying outrageous and hateful things and see what happens. And 4chan was playing that role. And so what we see with the American youth, this right-wing movement, is like the real threat facing Charlie Kirk wasn't coming from the progressive left. It was coming from youth who are even more radicalized than him, the Groypers. When you listen to what Fuentes is saying, it is really, really sickening stuff. They thought that Charlie Kirk was too middle of the road. And anyone who thinks that that play isn't happening in Canada needs to wake up. Wherever the MAGA playbook is being used, wherever there is the far right playbook, it's going to be brought to Canada. We see how the rise of extremist violence against immigrants in England, in Europe. Then we have in Canada, now we have the far right starting to march in the streets. They were just at Christie Pitts in Toronto, Christie Pitts, where the Nazis were chased out in 1933. These groups are looking for provocation. And then we see, Daniel Smith again talking about immigration, wanting to control immigration. These are dog whistles. Pierre Poilievre talking about our cities, our war zones. These are all dog whistles about the threat of immigrants, and Poilievre's first thing going back was getting rid of the temporary foreign worker program. Of all the priorities right now, that's your priority? Yeah, it is, because they're playing on this sort of rising level of race hatred that is really much driven by the far right.
This morning, a poll from Angus Reid landed in my inbox, and I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But the headline is that the Canadian youth are there's a big increase in anxiety over employment and income. And first of all, there was an affordability crisis. That's already an issue for them the last 2, 3 years. But more than that now is unemployment, because of course the economy is softening, and so they probably feel it first and hardest. And so what I worry about is that seems to be exactly the kind of conditions under which youth are radicalized.
Well, you've hit the nail on the head, and I think one of the failings, with Mark Carney, my concern is, and boy, man, lots of umbrellas hit me over the head anytime I question Mark Carney, as though someone said, Charlie, please come back to Canada and stand with Canada. Well, I just had mentioned the fact that people from both sides of parties had stood up in the standing ovation for Charlie Kirk in Parliament, but I think what Mark Carney needs to do is he needs to be speaking to the Canadian people. People tell me, trust the Prime Minister. He plays three-dimensional chess. Trust the Prime Minister. He's playing the long game. Well, yeah, but don't you think that MAGA is playing the long game with us by chipping away at us consistently? And I think there is a disconnect with the Liberal government. I don't think they know what it means to be insecure financially. And there is a serious level of insecurity. I hear that on my Midas town hall tours, people talking about, I want to boycott, but I can't even afford groceries. We need to talk about that. And if we talk about that in the progressive, left center, that's sending a reassuring message. If we're not saying that, then the far right take it, and people are going to shift to them in a dramatic way, because we are in tough times.
I want to ask you a question, because this is I made this argument in a video last week. I said the title was, I voted for values, Mark Carney. I got Goldman Sachs, Mark Carney. And I don't think you can understand Mark Carney unless you understand that he spent the first part of his career, first 15 years, as a senior managing partner in Goldman Sachs Canada. Who is Goldman Sachs Canada? Well, globally, it's one of the biggest private investment banks and financial advisors, risk advisors around. But in Canada, it is the face of corporate Canada, the incumbents. And then he brought Tim Hodgson along as Minister of Natural Resources. Who was he? Goldman Sachs CEO
Yeah.
up until 2003. And all of a sudden now we've got these projects of national interest. Who's coming forward? Corporate Canada, because they're the only ones that have shovel-ready projects, have capital, have the organizational managerial skills to do these kinds of projects that Carney wants to do. So what this is turning out to be is essentially a facilitation of all the projects that corporate Canada wanted, including the oil and gas industry, and that they wanted for a long time. And they're exacting their pound of flesh, which is rollback regulations, subsidies, and on and on. I worry about that.
Well, I do too. I mean, the thing that is we're facing is that in January when Trump threatened us, we had Pierre Poilievre, who was continuing on his idiot tour of blaming Trudeau and burning the house to the ground. And we had the NDP with our leader, talking about his beard in one of his final week videos and his hair and, being a street fighter, tough dude. I mean, I don't want to, I served with Jagmeet. I like the guy, but, Canadians wanted to know what the hell we were going to do about Trump. And the New Democrats dropped the ball. The Conservatives would not change. And Mark Carney walked up the middle and offered to be a wartime prime minister. Now we don't have the New Democrats on committee, and Canadians are going to learn really quickly what happens when there's no guardrails on the left in Parliament. It's going to be very much like American style politics, with basically one center right and one far right party pushing the center right further to the right. So Mark Carney got that mandate to be a wartime prime minister. So my issue is, and I don't want him to fall. I mean, we're all locked in here. We're all in the lifeboat together now. But he has to be a wartime prime minister. And to do that, you got to do better than saying, I'm going to bring an austerity budget. I mean, God almighty, is this 1998 all over again? There are so many nation building projects. I mean, we've just suddenly thrown out years that the Trudeau government was talking about but failed to deliver on clean tech, where we could have established regional energy hubs. There's such a vision thing that needs and is possible now. And I also just say I think Canadians are ready for tough choices, but they want those choices to be delivered in a way that there's a vision, not just that, like, hey, it's austerity time and we're going to build big boondoggle projects, because don't they say that Canada is like three oligarchs in a trench coat? And one of those oligarchs, it's big oil, big mining, and usually either Galen Weston
Banks.
or the banks. Yeah, exactly.
I've stolen your saying quite often actually, but change it to three incumbents in a trench coat.
Right.
Either one works.
Yeah.
I'll tell you from our point of view, Charlie. One of here at Energy Media, we track half of our time what's going on at the global level, and I just finished some interviews with Ember Energy about electrotech, electrification of economies. That's the direction the global economy is going in. If you want to be competitive going forward, you need to be able to manufacture EVs. You need to have a
Yeah.
battery industry
Yeah.
with supply chains. You need to electrify your own economy so that you can bring down costs and increase efficiency and lower emissions at the same time. All that's a totally different vision or strategy for the economy than what Mark Carney is selling us. I'm kind of shocked, to be honest with you. I thought we were going to get the climate Carney who would move in the direction that the global economy is moving. Why do you think that that's not the case?
I'm actually surprised on this, because I mean there's nobody who knows uh, economics and environment more than Mark Carney. He made his name on it. But I mean, any dumb backbencher, if they said, name me a project that will unite the nation, will say, we need a pipeline. Well, we just built one. We need LNG. I mean, when I talked to the Germans, when we were there meeting the Social Democrats in 2022, they said, listen, by the time you guys get your LNG ports built, we're going to have moved on. So if you've got something to offer us in the world of hydrogen, something to offer us in clean, we'll talk to you. But we've already built our LNG ports and we're moving on. And we never talk about the massive amount of methane that's involved with LNG. I'm not an ideologue on this, but it just seems like we always come up with the same solutions. I just did a post today on Meidas Canada about the Ring of Fire. I mean, it's in my region. 20 years ago, I was like, we're going to get the Ring of Fire built. We're going to get the Ring of Fire built. We're going to get smelters built. It didn't get built for a reason. It is really, really fragile land that will be severely damaged. They never did the consultation with First Nations. It's going to bog down. I can tell you, I know the young people are already moving up to the base camps to fight this. And yet we have critical mineral projects set to go. I could name 5 off the top of my head, one in my backyard almost, to build, this world-class infrastructure of getting critical minerals to markets that are not going to be the United States, but Europe and Asia. We can do that. But let's focus on the good projects.
Well, and more than that, I would say what we need here in Canada is a strategy. But that, grist for
Yeah,
another conversation,
yeah.
Charlie. I want to talk about the relationship between the oil and gas industry and the radicalization of youth. Charlie Kirk was tied to the American oil and gas industry. Donald Trump has his energy dominance doctrine, which is all about using fossil fuels, promoting fossil fuels, using them as a stick to beat other nations into these unilateral trade deals that he's trying to negotiate. And I again worry that this whole radicalization of youth, perhaps it's being funded by the oil and gas industry. There's a strong Christian nationalist component to it, which could, plays in Alberta in a big
Hmm.
way. And if it can is contained to Alberta, that's one thing. If Alberta burns, that's one thing. But I worry about it spreading outside to other parts of Canada.
Well, I mean, I see it all over my Facebook feeds, which are, it's just becoming a toxic swamp like X, but like constant attacks on EV, constant attacks on clean energy as though it's some kind of threat. Um, there is the I mean, oil and gas we know have spent billions in fake science, fake groups. The online disinformation campaigns are extreme. I can say that from having decided to step up above the trench and talk about the need to follow through on the UN's call to end false advertising in oil and gas and fossil fuels. And man, I mean, we couldn't pick up our phones for about 5 days because of the death threats and the rage. Those rage farms, they just don't happen. It's not natural. I mean, I've seen these patterns of rage and threat. I saw it through Convoy. I saw it through the final days of COVID. I saw it with those who were like calling me and threatening me because what I'm going to somehow take their, diesel truck away from them just for saying we can't have false advertising. And again, Nemshi, leader, New Democrat, I like Nemshi a lot, but he was like saying, this isn't what we need right now. We have to work together. Well, what corporation gets to false advertise? That's not working together. And again, like I remember the days when Suncor used to call me and they had their, the women who worked there with the nice scarves around their neck and they talked about their greening strategy. They've thrown that all out the window. They're going for the burning of the planet right now because all the stars are aligned on the far right. And just, I know it's a bit of a diversion or a bit of a change on the road that I'm on, but I was really noticing Jason Kenney's talk recently, and Jason and I don't agree on anything except what he said about the supposed Alberta separatist movement, saying there's like what, a couple of thousand of them, and they are, you know, vaccine deniers, they're pro-Putin trolls, they're total MAGA, and they love Trump. You know, so you don't need a lot of people to drive a disinformation and rage machine. You just have to know how to amp them up, and they're getting amped up.
I disagree with you on Jason Kenney
Hmm.
because I reported on Alberta from the time that he came back into provincial politics in 2017. And what he did, Charlie, this is my take on it. What he did is in order to bring in the Unite the Right and then turn it into more of a conservative, but really farther right party, is he mobilized a lot of the Christian nationalists in
Yep, yep,
Alberta that the PCs had, Ed Stelmach and Peter Lougheed had neutralized. The PCs in Alberta were a very big tent party. And I knew some of those radicals. I knew some of those far right guys, and they always managed to keep them under control. They had them on a leash. And
yep.
what Kenney did was loose the dogs of the far right. And then they came back to get him because he wasn't radical enough in 2022 at the party, when he didn't lose his leadership vote, but I think got like 51%. So Jason Kenney is the author of his own misfortune. And I
Oh, I
remember when,
agree. I agree. I agree. Yeah.
okay,
I
I
agree
could
with
go on
that.
a little
Yeah.
rant. And
No.
my point here,
Yeah.
Charlie, don't let Jason Kenney rehabilitate himself.
Okay, that's a good point. I just was struck by him saying that because yeah, I think these are the people he invited into his house and then they ransacked it. And now they burnt it to the ground. But that he identified them as being, you know, Putin trolls and pro MAGA. So the people who would be out to destroy our country. Um, that to me is significant. But I watched how Harper kept the worst of the worst on the back bench even though he'd let them off about once a month. But now they're all on the front bench with Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, that's a real
Yeah,
problem.
yeah.
And if you spend any time in Alberta, as I do, and my head's there all the time because we're reporting on it, the prevalence of that. I interviewed Professor Dwayne Bratt from Mount Royal University, political science professor, and the strength of the Maple MAGA movement. All of these far right types that Jason Kenney was talking about. It's a lot more prevalent in Alberta than any other
Mm,
province. It's
yeah, yeah.
approaching the influence of, the percentage of citizens close to what the US is, like 25% are evangelical Christians. And
Well, yeah, yeah.
so, anyway, on
There
that
you go.
note,
On that note.
uh, tell us more about the podcast. So, you started a week ago. Where can folks find it?
Well, it's the Charlie Angus Meidas Canada YouTube. So we post something every single day, and we're posting a mix of things. I was in Mexico. I was invited to be at the uh, Latin American Parliamentary Congress of Progressive Leaders. So I went and we shot some footage there and talked about what's happening in Mexico because Canada needs to see a bigger worldview. I've just posted on my views on the Ring of Fire. I'm posting on Charlie Kirk. Also trying to build a sense of this global conversation about resistance. How do you resist? How do you stand up? How do people stop feeling alone? So we're in the hundred and we blew past 100,000 subscribers on day one. We're building that. We've got the Charlie Angus Resistance Substack, which is now about 4 days a week. It was every single day I was writing an essay because I felt the need was so great. And we've started these Meidas Canada Resistance Tour town halls where we're going to communities. And part of it is reassuring Canadians what we're doing is really important. The world is watching Canada right now. We're seen as the front line in this fight to defend democracy. People have been really moved by how Canadians have come together. But what it is it's a fragile line that we're holding, and we got to keep holding that line. The Canadian boycott is very strong. You don't see that in the Canadian media, and I've had funny conversations with Canadian journalists who sometimes check in, but they never do the story. And I said, "You're not going to do the story, are you? Because it's not the story you expected. Your story is, oh, it was really big in the spring, and then Canadians kind of got tired, and then they went back, and now they're going back and doing their normal thing." And I said, "That's false. If you look at American media, there's the impacts of the boycott are growing. So why aren't we talking about that from the Canadian perspective?" So I part of what I do is to reassure people, to tell them what they're doing is good. You need to hear that in these dark times, but also to warn them. I think the storm's coming. We're in the early stages of, I think, a much bigger storm. It's going to be a storm of disinformation, a storm of AI. Certainly, what Daniel Smith is playing with these attempts to break our country up are going to get magnified seriously. We're going to start to see more of the right wing hate playbook that's played in Europe starting to play here in Canada. And we need to know that that's coming so we're not taken by surprise. I think if we can see it straight on and we've got the language about how to resist and how to call it out, then we're going to get through this.
I wanted to give you a little anecdote that Professor Bodie told me about during the interview. And that is that Turning Point USA, which was Charlie Kirk's organization, and it's huge in the United States. So they tried to replicate it, and they do. They're in the UK and they're in other countries. They set up a chapter in Canada in 2017, 2018. It failed.
Hmm.
It was the only country in which it failed
Really?
because our culture here, it's we're more of a secular nation than the United States is, and it never took root. And I think that says something about the Canadian character, our values. But that was 2017, 2018. How much has changed post-COVID is an open question.
That's really an interesting thing. I think there's a couple of things that has struck me as differences because I was meeting with progressive Democrats, uh, and came up to me and said, "How do we replicate in the United States what what you managed to do in Canada?" And I said, "Well, number one, we got to start speaking to people we stopped speaking to. We need to build these bigger tents. The bigger tent is." And I think that that is what we think in Canada. We think we find this common ground across diverse areas. And boy, I got shut down immediately. Like the culture wars, the hard lines are so embedded in the United States, even within the Democratic Party, even among Republicans, that they just couldn't see how to build a bigger tent unless they decided who got into the tent first. And I think one of the things, we are a nation of compromise and we are a nation of, we have so many of these weird shared values over such a vast geography. And I think it goes back to the fact that, you know, Marlboro Man wouldn't have lasted very long in Canada because he wouldn't have been able to push his own vehicle out of the snow. Like you have to, we had to rely on our neighbors. We had to learn to rely on each other. And maybe the reason we never had a dominant Canadian narrative or dominant symbol is because being born of compromise, we all agreed, okay, we're all Canadians. Okay, let's leave it at that. We don't want to fight about it. So, I think we are more wary of those hard extremist lines, and our religious values were always, I think, more temperate. We were United Church, we were Anglican. The Catholic Church did not like people getting out and burning stuff, right? Like we were different, we're a different culture. So maybe that's one of the hopeful signs.
Yeah, that reminds me of the social gospel,
Yeah, the
which
social
which
gospel, exactly.
was the part of the foundation that built your party.
Well, I mean, yeah, I always joke we're the only party that was founded by Baptist ministers. And I mean, as some people call me, I mean, I don't know, I'm a democratic socialist. They say, "Are you a democratic socialist? Are you a social democrat?" I said, "I'm a democratic hoser." I think is most of what I am. But I'm as comfortable walking into a Baptist church as I am into a union hall. I don't know. I just feel like that's being Canadian, and I think one of the good things is, and I try and tell good stories on these tours, just because these are very dark times and people are very frightened. But I think that Canadians were sleepwalking to a disaster, and we would have easily fallen down the MAGA hole if Donald Trump hadn't hit us first. And I think we're rediscovering things that we'd forgotten about ourselves. And we need to talk about the good things about what we are. And, we can argue about our interpretations of it later, but right now we're in a trench. And as long as you're in the trench, you got to stay focused. And where would I be in a trench? If I'd rather be in a trench with a bunch of Canadians than anybody else, because I know they're going to have my back, and we could disagree afterwards a ton. But on the other side, that trench are people who are tearing each other apart. They may be a lot more Americans, but they are divided. They are very freaked out, or they're very rageful. We just don't want them turning their attention anymore to us. But right now, we're holding a line, and that's really important for people to remember.
Tell me a good story, Charlie.
Tell you a good story
Tell me a good story.
from what I've seen, or
You said that you like
yeah.
telling good stories at your resistance tour events. Tell us a good story.
I classic story. It was a woman came to one of our events, and this was in the early days of the Trump threat, when everybody was very rattled and frightened. And the woman said she was so scared, so caught up in doom scrolling, which everybody was, that she went and started knocking on her neighbors' doors. She didn't know what else to do. Well, we used to knock on neighbors' doors, and we stopped. And she found that every neighbor she knocked on, they were as frightened as she was, and they all felt we should do something too. So then they formed this local, they called it their Elbows Up group, but people are forming that. We've got now Grandmothers Against Genocide being formed. Like my mother, who's never done anything remotely political, called me and said, I just can't take this anymore as a grandmother watching children starve. I'm going to stand on the street with a sign in my walker. Maybe people might shout at me. And I said, well, what are you going to have on your sign? She's going to, I'm just say it's going to say a grandmother against genocide. Well, there's groups now all over Canada. And the good part of the story is if you're looking for someone to do something, if you're waiting for someone and you're wanting to hear why hasn't someone done something yet, it's because they're waiting for you. Once you do that, then other people can join you. And I really believe, I would like to think someone's coming to save us. They're not. I'd like to think that the Democrats are going to get their act together in the midterms. I doubt it. There may not even be proper midterms at this point. But the only way we're going to rebuild democracy is from the ground up. We're going to have to start going to community halls, church basements, whether it's a local group, whether you're picking up garbage, I don't care what you're doing. Whether you're doing Tesla takedowns, Grandmothers Against Genocide, whatever you're doing is about building community because we got to start rebuilding that relationship with our neighbors and each other and realizing that, yeah, as Canadians, we're pretty okay. We're good people. And if we have that, then it doesn't matter what they throw at us. But if we're isolated and alone and doom scrolling, then MAGA is going to rattle our world in a very bad way.
I would agree with that, Charlie, because you and I are, close enough in age. We grew up in a time when communities were stronger and people did get together and they spent more time in, community activities. They were volunteers and so on.
Yeah.
Not to say that that's disappeared, but I don't think the fabric of that is as tight as it used to be. And a lot of it has to do with, now we've got TV all the time and we've got social media on our phones. And so we've kind of turned inward. And maybe the threat from Trump, as you say, is the opportunity for us to rediscover how to build those roots and those, weave a new cloth of Canadian culture in response to Trump.
That I think at the end of the day is my message. I say to people, I know you think I got a big plan. There is no big plan. We're facing a time of darkness, and we're facing a time where people can drive disinformation and rage and division and make people blame each other. And the strong sense of community that we had has frayed substantially. I mean, I know when I moved back up north, I mean, everybody was involved in the Lions Club. People went to church. I ran the church youth group and singing, and all the kids came out, and then people stopped doing that. And then I think after COVID, and then we decided to just live online on the screen. We were very isolated. We were very alone, and we were frightened of each other. And that's what made us, I think, very susceptible to the lies and the threats. So again, whatever it is, folks, you got to get out there and you got to meet people who aren't of your necessary same background and views. That's what makes community is bumping up against people and getting to realize, well, at the end of the day, he might be a bit of a blowhard, but he's a pretty okay guy. That to me is Canada too.
On that note, Charlie, I think that's the perfect note on which for us to end this interview. Thank you very much for this, and we will be, I'll check in with you every couple of months, and we'll have you back because you're doing God's work, man.
Well, thank you. We're heading out to British Columbia, Regina, September 23rd. We're heading out to British Columbia for a couple of dates, and boy, oh boy, they're twisting my arm hard to get back into Alberta. So I got to make that happen. So we'll keep you in touch.